Welcome again to GPS, God's Prophetic Surprises, the program where we approach the book of Revelation from a multi-generational perspective. And I'm Jon Paulien, professor of religion at Loma Linda University. I have with me Guilherme Borda, who's a doctoral student at Andrews University and studying the book of Revelation itself. So we're glad to have him with us. And coming in from Kansas is Nick Snell. He's a youth pastor at Shawnee, Kansas. And we're delighted to have him here. This technology is amazing stuff. And we look forward to a day maybe when Nick can be with us live, but it feels almost live having you right with us today. So we're glad for that. Glad we can be back in studio with our audience. So hope that you're enjoying these programs. And why don't you, Guilherme, just read for us the 18th verse of Revelation 13, where we're getting into this exciting business of the 666.
Okay. Revelation 13, verse 18. Today I'm reading from the New King James Version. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666.
All right, so we got this number, 666, or as many people like to say, 666. Mm-hmm. Nick, what have you heard about 666? What are some of the options you're aware of?
Well, it's interesting. If you want to do a search on Google for 666, you'll find a lot of things from movies. I mean, Revelation is very iconic in our culture. But the biggest thing you'll find is the question, what does 666 really mean? What's the secret of 666? You see that question over and over. And so I'm really glad that we're going to get into that today. But one of the things that, first of all, comes to my mind as a Seventh-day Adventist is that 6 is not 7. Today we were pulling into the Walmart pickup and we had to pick a spot, you know, and you're going to tell them which spot you're in. And I was like, oh, let's go into the 7 for Seventh-day Adventists. So as Seventh-day Adventists, we're very familiar with 7 as the number for completion, a number that really represents God and his ways. And so 666 is definitely not 7, is what I'll start with for this program.
All right. Well, is this number relevant at the time Revelation was written, or is it relevant at the end time, or what? As you look at the text.
When this book came as a letter to those 7 churches, I'm sure that people would think, okay, so let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, his number is 666. I'm sure they would want to think about it. It either struck them as clear or as something they had to think through, that they wanted to think through, that they wanted to process, right? It's not, it's very interesting. I think the way they approach Revelation, in some sense, was very different than how Christians generally approach today. For one, I think we have every reason to believe that they read the whole thing in one sitting. Right? At least the first time.
They had a little bit more of what you'd call patience. Or
attention span.
Attention span, yeah.
I mean, if a letter comes, John, our friend, received this visit from Jesus. He has this letter. Are they going to stop in chapter, they didn't have chapter, but chapter 4 and say, brothers and sisters, we'll continue next week. No, keep reading, keep reading, of course.
Look at the whole thing.
You know, of course,
yeah.
Right? And then, but more than that, I'm sure they would want to think about this, to reason through this, to try to seek this wisdom, to try to understand it. And so I think it's interesting that he raised this point that what would it have meant for them in the first century?
But why do most people think this is an end time thing? If,
yes,
you know, take a look here. If you go to the verse, let him who is understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man. Now that's present tense. So it seems to me it's talking about something that's present tense, Now, I think many times people have seen this 666 as end of time. Other people saw it in the Middle Ages. What do you do with that present tense?
The question I would raise is whether this present tense should be seen as necessarily indicating time or just as a verb that just means this equals that.
It's
right?
ongoing, though. You know, the Greek present is kind of durational. It's something. So it's like it's there. It's always there. A little bit of a trap. Okay. Chapter 13, the tenses in chapter 13 are all related to 12:17. In 12:17, you've come to the end time. All right, 12:17 is not the part of the chapter where you're talking about the baby Jesus and the war in heaven and all that kind of stuff. You've come to the end, and in 12:17, it says the dragon went out to make war with the remnant of her seed. That's the context of chapter 13. The dragon, it says, went away to make war. And where does he go? He goes to the beach and calls a beast out of the sea and a beast out of the earth. So the context of chapter 13 is not John's day. The context is the very end of time. So when you get into chapter 13, we've talked about this before, there's some things that are in present tense, some things that are in past tense, some things that are in future tense. The tenses of chapter 13 are related to 12:17, not to the time of John and the time of his people. So this number is particularly relevant. It's an identifier that will be particularly relevant at the end of time. So it's not, they would have looked for some value in it, and we'll ask that question in just a little bit. But it's clearly down the line a bit that this becomes really important. Having said that, though, it does say, here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. The Greek is, let him who has a mind. If you got a brain, this is for you, okay? So there's a sense in which everybody's supposed to know this 666. Everybody's invited. So it's both an end time thing, but it also has relevance for the original readers. Yeah, Nick.
Yeah, so if I'm imagining what would first come to mind for people that were reading this letter for the first time, Revelation makes so many allusions to the Old Testament, probably, as far as I know, more than any other book in the New Testament, just so many allusions to the Old Testament. And the only other time that 666 is used in the Bible is in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. And I learned this from Ranko Stefanovich's book, Plain Revelation. And that verse simply says, 1 Kings 10:14, the weight of the gold that Solomon received yearly was 666 talents. Now, Stefanovich points out that it's after this section where it mentions all this money that he's receiving that it seems that Solomon's life really goes off track. He starts marrying a bunch of wives from other kingdoms and just going away from God, maybe focusing more on money and his own greatness than on God, who put him in the position that he was in. So I just wanted to point out that that is probably what the early readers might have thought of first when they heard the number 666.
All right, and who was Solomon? He was the son of David.
Yep, son of David, the third king of Israel.
And we remember that if you're in the beginning part of chapter 13, the beast from the sea is a counterfeit of Jesus Christ. And it's that same beast that has the number 666. So that, I think what you're saying, Nick, makes perfect sense in the light of that this number is intimately connected with what we know about the beast from earlier in the chapter. So with Revelation, the more you study it, sometimes the more questions you have, but sometimes things do start falling together.
Yes. Yes.
So when you say that, is there any connection, you know, they call Jesus the son of David, right?
Yeah.
So for Solomon was one of the literal sons of David in 666. Is there a connection there?
Absolutely. Jesus was called the son of David repeatedly, especially in Matthew.
Right, so as far as a counterfeit.
It's part of the allusion to Jesus in the beast. Remember the beast, it looks like the dragon. You know, Jesus, have you seen me, you've seen the Father. The beast gets its authority from the dragon. Jesus says, my authority comes from the Father. The beast has a death and resurrection, just like Jesus. It has a ministry of 1,260, 42 months, just like Jesus, 3.5-year ministry. So you have a major counterfeit going on, a parody going on here.
Would it be too much to say that it's very interesting that with Solomon, there's this mention of these things that he had, and then afterwards, there's not only these foreign wives, but there's foreign gods. He turns to idolatry, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's interesting that as the Christian movement progressed from a minority religion to the majority religion with the imperial approval, with consequently gold pouring in, power, authority, money, that might have been as well part of that problem that led it to idolatry. Right? So I think that what happened to Solomon was similar to Solomon the individual, was similar to what happened to a portion of Christianity during those centuries, maybe third, fourth century. Well, those progress, as you transition from the early church to then later Christendom, this very powerful empire-like institution, that transition that involved also not only turning, not only changing the numbers in the bank account, so to speak, but changing its ways and being involved in idolatry.
Well, Bart Ehrman is one of the leading scholars of early church history, and he's not himself a professing Christian, so there's not a Christian bias in what he's saying, but he has observed that Christianity changed a great deal, especially in the time when the emperors became Christian, that Christianity gave up the Sabbath, for example. It began to abandon the Old Testament. It started being less concerned about obedience to the commandments, etc. This is a secular scholar saying Christianity changed its identity. And as far as he could see in the course of history, Christianity wasn't improved by that exchange. If anything, it led to a splitting with Judaism and ultimately war with Islam and so on. So that's a piece, and there's secular historians who recognize that Christianity isn't what it was, isn't necessarily what it could be. And one mission of those who study the Bible today is to seek to restore the biblical image of Christianity in the church as far as possible. One more piece here. There was a famous British scholar, C.H. Dodd, who wrote a little book, just 70 pages, I think, in 1953, called According to the Scriptures. And he analyzed all the places in the New Testament that quote the Old and observed that they almost never use the Old Testament for proof texts. Instead, they'll quote an Old Testament text as a pointer to its larger context. And this comes back to what you said, Nick, the idea that maybe Solomon's going wrong right around the time of his 666 of income, that the Hebrew mind would see 666, remember 1 Kings 10, and say, oh, that's when Solomon went off the rails. Whatever this beast is, it would be a godly entity that's gone off the rails in some way. So that's how it ties all these pieces together just a little bit. What else?
That's really
yeah, go ahead.
I just was reading something this week that was saying basically that comfort, thinking of like luxury and having an abundance, is not really good for courage or for character. And so it's interesting what Guilherme was pointing out, and you were pointing out as well, Dr. Paulien, that Christianity kind of started to focus more on power, and it didn't go in a good direction once they were well established. And at the same time, it seems that God's people were tempted with idolatry before, when they were weak, when they were smaller, I should say, when they, if they were beaten up by another country, they would say, or another nation, I should say, they would think, well, maybe their God is stronger than ours, rather than looking at their own sin or what was causing them not to trust in God. And so I think there are ditches on either side. If you're not powerful, it's easier to assume that those who are more powerful have a stronger God or a better way of life to follow, and that can be a temptation. And if you are powerful, you can just kick back and relax and not feel like you need to hold on to any morals, if that makes sense.
So what else? I think you made a really good point, Nick, about pointing us in the direction of 1 Kings 10 as something the original readers would have gotten. What else in the text might they have noticed that would help explain 666? Let's go to the number. What does the number 6 mean, and what do you make of it within Revelation or within the Bible?
So later in Revelation, you have this mention of Babylon and this coming out of Babylon and this conflict, right? So basically you have in Revelation these two cities, right? New Jerusalem versus Babylon. And it's interesting to notice that the numerical system in Babylon was based on the number 6, right? And I think there is a connection with that too. I think this connects to it.
That's really interesting, because the 10 system was the one we're used to.
Yes.
That actually goes back to Egypt, to the time of Moses and beyond. 6s, that goes to Babylon, all the way back to the time of Abraham. So these are very early, but there's 2 separate systems, the 10s and the 6s. But you're saying the 6s is associated with Babylon.
Yes, I mean, and it makes sense to think of Babylon, because in this text, you're reminded of the time when those three faithful Hebrew young men, or 3 faithful Hebrews, that they resisted that command to worship that image of Babylon, right? Which is one of the beasts in Daniel. So they basically resisted. They refused to worship the image of the beast, quite literally, in a sense. And then they were in Babylon. So it is natural to think of Babylon here. And the book later explicitly mentions Babylon. And then knowing that their numerical system is based on the number 6.
But in this very context, you have the reference to Daniel 3. An image being set up to worship, and the image in Daniel 3 was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. So you got the 6s going on there. But, come on, people. Why would anyone number with 6s? 10 is so much superior to that. I mean, numbering with 6s is totally crazy. We wouldn't think of doing that. Oh, wait a minute. That's right. We number by 6s too. Time, geography, latitude, longitude is 360 degrees around the world.
Angles.
Angles, etc. So.
And by the way, most of our numbers actually today are binary. In the computers.
Now we're numbering by 2s.
Computers only know 0s and 1s, only 0s and 1s. Right?
So now you got 3 systems, 2s, 6s, and 10s. Okay, but I would agree, I think, that the 10s is a more efficient system once you have Arabic numerals, the kinds that we use. But numbering by 6s is very efficient as well. You can divide 60 by a whole bunch of ways. I think 15 different numbers will divide into 60. So it does work very, very well by itself. So the number 6 then represents Babylon, which is introduced in the very next chapter. So a very important piece. And Rebecca Liu, in her doctoral dissertation on the image of the beast, I think I mentioned a couple times ago, she said that in her view, the image of the beast and Babylon are the same thing. And that would support that you have all, you introduce the image of the beast, you got a bunch of Babylon imagery, and then you name Babylon in the very next chapter. So I think that's an important piece.
And it also, I think, ties with the, in my opinion, I think it ties somewhat with the whole idea of the healing of the mortal wound, because it's this desire that this system will last forever, right? Because in Babylon, why did Nebuchadnezzar put that statue there all gold? Because in the dream, he was only the head. He didn't want to be only the head. He wanted to be the whole thing. The whole thing now is gold. He wanted his kingdom to last. Now the sea beast now has this healing. It's back, and is back wanting to stay. Now it has an image, right? So it seems to me that that also might possibly indicate this desire that this false system of worship is here to stay. That's what they want, but it doesn't work that way. Later in the book, we get the good news.
Do you have any thoughts on the number 6, Nick?
Well, I actually just wanted to clarify something. So verse 15 says, the second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship the image to be killed. So it's talking about 2 beasts. We're talking about the number of the beast. And which beast are we talking about? I think normally people just think it's the devil. You could think, oh, it's the dragon. But that it seems to be talking about the sea beast image or the second beast.
Yeah, well, the sea beast is in reference to the land beast. It's called the beast. So after the land beast appears in chapter 13, the beast always refers to the sea beast. So this is about the sea beast. Not the land beast precipitates the image of the beast, but the sea beast is the one that's referred to here. Yeah, so that the whole context of the counterfeit of Christ goes there. But here, number 6 is short of 7. You know, 7's the perfect number. 6 is short of that. 6 is the 6th day when human beings were created, and the serpent was created on the 6th day.
Yes.
6 is half of 12. 12 is the number of the church, so it's, it doesn't measure up there. It's double number 3, which is the Trinity. So a lot of people would say the original readers could have made some sense of this by just seeing the number 6, but there's limitations to that. The number here is not 666, it's 666. So the full number is important. That's why your Solomon reference probably is a significant one, Nick. So you can't simply play with these numbers. It's got to be something deeper. And so the ancients had at least 3 ways of looking at this. Tell us about the amulets briefly. And maybe you can even show that. I don't know if the camera can catch it.
I think it would be a little bit difficult to show. But so I'll just for being short, I'll quote. So Branko Stefanovic, in his commentary, he says that a popular amulet worn by Babylonian priests contain a mysterious configuration of numbers in a square. So these numbers, think about this, basically a table of numbers, something like that. But the sum of all those numbers is 666. Actually, the sum of all the different sequences, both horizontally and vertically.
So it's 36 numbers, like 6 rows, 6 columns.
Yes.
All right, 36 numbers from 1 to 36. And they're located in such a way that you can get 111. Each of the rows, each of the columns are all 111. And you add the 611, so you have 666. So
if you add the 5 rows or the 5 columns, that's what it is. Okay, I was getting a bit...
So one theory is that the 666 in the 1st century have been understood as a reference to amulets in the Babylonian religion that have 666. The only problem with that one is the earliest reference to that is a manuscript in the 17th century. So there's really no evidence that Babylonian priests actually used that. That seems to maybe have come in much later. But there's one I know you like, and that's you take the Roman numerals and you add them up from D, 500, C, 100, L, 50, X, 10, V5I1. You add up the Roman numerals, that's 666. And that's something they could have known in their day. I mean, I'm pretty sure somebody stopped and added it up and said, hey, that's 666. So what would that tell you if 666 is related to Roman numerals?
Oh, and just one thing, because someone might ask, you know, what about the letter M?
I like the way every time I ask you a question, you answer the question you wish I'd asked.
It's because someone will bring it up. Yes, that's a Roman, because so you posted this on Twitter, and I thought, yes, this is good. But someone replied, what about the letter M? I think more than one person maybe.
Yeah.
It seems, however, I'm not an expert on this by any stretch of imagination, but it seems that the letter M came in later into the system. And if that's the case, then it would be amazing. But anyhow, it is amazing that you can do that. And, you know, they had brilliant people back then, maybe more brilliant than people now, I don't know, because they were, the way they used their minds. And it's possible that someone came with that calculation. And if they came to that, they would see, this could be something with Rome. And I think they wouldn't be very far.
So that represents Rome then. So perhaps an initial reader would say this, you know, whatever's going on down at the end of time, it would have something to do with Rome. So that's a possibility. We don't want to press that too hard, but that's an interesting connection.
But I think that would align pretty well with how we have been reading so far, because how we read the sea beast is this, basically this derailing of Christianity centered in Rome, with this power from Rome during this time of the Middle Ages, right? That 1260 days. So basically, it is Rome. It is, and no wonder that in Daniel, the little horn, it sprouts from, it's associated with that fourth beast with Rome. So basically, you had this Rome. I mean, I don't like saying like secular Rome and religious Rome, because there's no such a thing as secular Rome. It was always religious. But you had this pagan Rome and like Christian Rome, but it's Rome, right? It's the problem is, I think the problem is that Christianity became Roman in an imperial sense. I think that was the problem of the derailing. One of the problems.
And Christianity originally was an Eastern religion, which is a very different mentality, a very different thought pattern, and so on. One more thing that, one more major one in the ancient time, we don't have time to really get into now, but people often looked at the 666 and thought it related to Nero, the emperor. And in our next program, we can explain that briefly, but we haven't gotten to the heart of it yet. We've been talking about what the early readers could have read when they were seeing this, but we also have to ask the question, if it's an end-time concept, if this is important at the end time, then what meaning could it have looking down through history? And we'll come to that when we come back to it next time. So this has been GPS. Good to have you with us, and we'll see you again next time.